All right, you good?
Yeah,
I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about 25th Hour.
Before we get into this week's film, next week we're going to be watching A Woman Under the Influence, a John Cassavetes film. This is my first John Cassa. Nope, it's your first John Cassavetes
Yeah, I've never
experience.
seen it.
My third John Cassavetes experience, but we specifically picked this film because of the passing of the great. Uh, so it will be a fun
Gina
time
Roland.
into yes, Gina Roland. Thank you. I was I don't know why I was I'm looking at the letterbox. I don't know why I struggled with her name, but Gina Roland
Most people
passed.
probably know her as like the old lady in the Notebook,
away.
but like the average person. But she was married to John Cassavetes, and they're in a bunch of movies together. And I don't know if Cassavetes is in a Women Under the Influence. Peter Falk is though, and I like him a lot. And of course, we watched Mikey and Nicky, which is a great
Did
film.
yeah, I'm looking at the cast list now. I don't see Cassavetes on
Okay, then I guess he
the
just
acting
like
section,
directed it.
so I think he just directed, but
Okay.
it should be good. I'm excited.
Yeah, I agree.
This week we watched a Spike Lee joint, our
Yeah.
second Spike Lee joint for the podcast, 25th
Yep.
Hour. Of course, this is
Yep.
part of the Philip Seymour Hoffman collection, which, by the way, I've been
Hmm.
indulging in a lot of Philip Seymour Hoffman lately. I think I've watched almost every single film on that collection except Savages. That's the only one I haven't watched yet. And we'll talk about that in the after show a bit because some of the shows you and I have both seen before. So I'm excited to talk about that. But that is part of the reason why we picked this film in particular. I think it's
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
excuse to watch any film. I think anything with Philip Seymour Hoffman in it just elevates the film.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I like him a lot too, and he plays like a pretty relatively like low key performance in this, but he's very good in it still. I just think like I like Spike Lee a lot. I watched like a bunch of his movies, and this movie doesn't really like show up on streaming services that I have too often. So when I saw it was on Criterion, I was like, it's a good excuse to you know, use the show to watch the movie because this is a particularly celebrated movie of his. And it's a little unusual compared to his other movies that I've seen in a few different ways.
Well, one of the things that is unusual about this piece, which I noticed when they were rolling the credits at the beginning of the film, is that Spike Lee didn't write this film. Of course, he wrote
Yeah, it's based off a novel.
a lot of the films that he directed. This one is
Hmm.
based off of a novel, so it definitely has a different feel than a lot of his work because Spike Lee
Hmm.
has such a specific voice
Yeah.
and the way he tells story. Of course, it's a very visual medium, but dialogue has always been a big part of the way he tells his stories. I mean, you think of things like Do the Right Thing or even Malcolm X, how
Yeah.
important the way he tells that story is, and the language of it is so important. And so when you take that away, I think you lose a bit of the Spike Lee magic. I think it's still very much a Spike Lee joint, and you can see that. And it's a very much a 9/11 film. I mean, they
Yeah, this to me is like the ultimate like 9/11 movie, like pretty much. Like even this movie is probably says a lot more about like 9/11 than even the movies that are literally about 9/11. Like the events that happened on 9/11 is what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And this film takes place a couple of months, some time not very long after
Yeah,
9/11,
I mean the movie came out in 2002.
2002. So it couldn't
So I
have been
mean
that long after 9/11.
like 9/11 happened and it's like, oh, well, let's get it together. And yeah, one thing about the movie that's kind of funny is that like basically all the characters except for maybe like and in like you said, it's indicative of the fact that he didn't write it because all of the characters are like white people except for
Yeah.
like Rosario Dawson. They're all like white guys. It's really about like three like friends, right? That like live in
Mhm.
New York City. These white guys like Edward Norton, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Barry Pepper. So yeah, that's definitely indicative. That's definitely yeah a thing about the movie that is very much unlike a Spike Lee movie because obviously he's very interested in like black people and like specifically like black communities in like New York City because that's where he's from, of course. And yeah,
Yeah, and also these three individuals played by Edward Norton, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and who plays the banker? I've seen him in a bunch of stuff before.
Barry Pepper.
Barry Pepper. All pretty
He's
big
very good.
names, incredible performances all around. And these are
This is
just,
like, yeah.
go
Sorry.
ahead. No, you
No,
go
I
ahead.
interrupted you. Well, no, I was just gonna say that like this is like Edward Norton like operating like basically at the peak of his power, right? Like if you like think about like this like time period, it's like he was in this movie, he was in Fight Club, like he was like I think like what like a year or two later he was in Red Dragon, which I've never seen, but I
Yeah,
don't, I'm sure
it's fun.
it's fun.
It's fun. Yeah.
Have
It's
you ever
not like
seen Man?
incredible.
Have you ever seen Manhunter, the Michael Mann movie?
No.
It's like a pre Silence of the Lambs Hannibal movie that's based off of Red Dragon, but it's called Manhunter. And
Okay.
Hannibal is played actually by Brian Cox, who is in 25th Hour.
Wow.
So there you go. Yeah. Who's also great.
Yeah. Yeah, these three friends are arguably just some of the most evil human beings to walk
Yeah.
the earth. I mean, just the
They're
real
they're they're they're
sludge,
assholes. Yeah.
giant assholes who don't really care about anyone other than themselves. And I guess to a certain extent, each other. Definitely some serious pedophilic stuff going on. Definitely
Well,
some.
yeah, with the Seymour Hoffman with the PSH character, of course. Yeah, it's like he has like this latent pedophilia like urges, right? Like his character specifically. And yeah, they're just kind of like New York City like shitbags, they're kind of I think of like one of the best scenes in the movie, of course, is like the scene where he's looking in the mirror at the
The
bar.
Edward, yep.
Yeah, that's like one of the best scenes like of any movie. It's so good.
What makes that moment so powerful is I think it invokes, and I think this is what this film does so well when we talk about a 9/11 film. They're often referencing the event itself, but they're never actually
Right.
talking about 9/11. No one's
Because
talking
we
about the
get it.
day of. We
We
get
know
it.
we know
We
it.
know
We
what's
get
going
what
on. I
happened.
mean,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have
yeah.
like a 7-minute scene of just Philip Seymour Hoffman talking to the banker in front of the
Right,
9/11
which is another
memorial.
one of the great the Ground Zero is what they call it,
Ground
right? Like
Zero,
he literally
yes.
opens it up and there's Ground Zero and he's just like, "Oh geez," they kind of like that's crazy, and yeah, that's one of the best scenes in the movie too is when they're talking like at the Ground Zero.
There's a lot of really long takes in this film,
Yeah,
such as
I
that moment,
agree.
which it forces you to hold and just sit there and be uncomfortable, especially because these moments aren't close-ups of their faces necessarily. It's not you're seeing their whole face. Often they're in profile or they're even in shadow. And so
Right.
we're forced to look at the background. We're forced to look at the things around. We're forced to be stuck in these moments to feel uncomfortable. And I think that's one of the great successes of this film because it's
Yeah.
evoking that same sense of living in a place that has just been attacked by terrorists
Yeah.
and existing in that world and trying to figure out how to exist with it. And we go back to that moment with Edward Norton when he says, I hate these people, I hate these people.
Yeah, I hate this shit. I hate this. I hate
I
that.
hate this, I hate that, I hate the other thing. It's evoking all of the emotions that
Yeah.
all these people are feeling at this moment, which of
Right.
course is misplaced. And that's Edward Norton's
Sure.
growth,
Yeah.
is he realized
Yeah.
that this hatred is misplaced, but it's there. And, he's evoking a whole group of the New Yorker, which, Spike Lee loves his New Yorkers famously from
Yeah. Yeah.
New
He's a
York.
New York guy.
And New York is his place. And people from New York are like no one else in the world and all that stuff. And so he's trying to evoke these really strange emotions that are happening
Hmm.
simultaneously. I mean, walking by this place that has been torn to the ground and all these people that have died, or the banker living right across the street from the ground zero and refusing to leave, not
Yeah.
because
He's like, I
he's
don't care.
courageous,
Yeah.
just because
Yeah,
he's already
just
paid all this
hubris.
money for it.
Yeah,
And
kind of what you were talking. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying like alongside of that, like I think like the great thing about the movie is that like along with the fact that they're living in post 9/11 New York and the fact that, just to kind of, say what the movie's about. Edward Norton, he's a drug dealer. He got caught. He's going to prison for 7 years. And it's basically his last 24 hours of freedom before he has to go to prison. So like this, so, it's like the combination of that, right? The fact that he's going to prison and that all of these people are like upset. He's upset. Everybody is upset and completely like fucked up about it. Alongside the fact that they live, yeah, in like post 9/11, like New York City, like literally just happened. And so just like this combination of things like creates just like this horrible, dreadful like vibe throughout the whole movie in which like everyone is just like completely defeated. Like they're just kind of like this, like everyone is just like kind of like given up and is just floundering. You know, everyone is just sort of like everybody is like in their 30s, you know, like everyone is like there's no like young, you know, whippersnappers in the movie really. It's all just kind of like everyone just kind of like feels like their lives are over and that again, kind of like the dreadfulness of like 9/11 and the fact that like pretty much their friend or you know Edward Norton thinking about himself is like his life is like over and it creates like these like reverberations just like all these like reverberations whether it be 9/11 or him going up to prison it just creates this like dreadful in a good way I mean like a dreadful feel that is really quite potent and like and I think too that translation translates into the way the movie looks too I think
Yeah, it's a purposely frustrating film to watch. You're constantly just in this place of foreboding because we all know what's going to happen.
yeah
He knows what's going to happen. Everyone knows. And
yeah
I love the opening scene because it is such a great
yeah it's good
depiction of a character that we know is important and then another character who ends up being very important. And you can see that dynamic at the beginning, which is why it's so interesting
yeah
when we learn that the big Russian guy ends up being the
right
informant. So opening on those two and seeing that dynamic and seeing Edward Norton, his first idea is that he's gonna shoot the dog, right? He sees this dog inside the road. I'm
Yeah.
guessing this was a like fight dog, or people that were, what are those
The
called?
movie well, the movie like begins right with the sounds of like the dog getting beaten up.
Uh-huh.
It's like it already like I feel like you don't really know like how he got beat up or whatever. It just sounds like the dog's getting beaten up. And like so the movie's already kind of like throwing you in a very like it's already like throwing you into like a very like difficult and kind of like difficult yeah, like difficult situation of just like you start the movie and you hear the sounds of a dog getting hurt and it's like whining and crying and you're just like oh fuck you know like that's a like you don't even see anything it's like the title you know it's the studio names and it's just like you already hear like this you know terrible sounds
This poor dog being tortured.
yeah
And Monty comes across the tortured dog, and his first idea is just to kill it, to shoot it in the head, to
yeah
bring it some peace. And they have this argument back and forth. And the Russian guy is just very worried about, we got to keep going. Who cares about this? Showing the differences between these two people. Monty, he's a drug dealer, but at the end of the day, he is very conflicted by the thing that he does. And this dynamic is also really interesting between Monty and the banker,
right
stockbroker,
because he's like he fucking deserves it like
because the stockbroker, like, even though this
yeah
is his best friend in the world and he feels some sort of guilt, he also feels like he deserves it because he sees this drug dealer, he sees his friend Monty as someone who has caused pain to others. So he
yeah
has this cognitive dissonance where simultaneously the stockbroker hates Monty for who he is, what he's done, and he's put himself in this position and he deserves to go to jail. But on the opposite end, this is his best friend and he
yeah
loves him and he would do absolutely anything for him. And he can't seem to put these two worlds together. And Monty, too, tries to separate his two worlds. He tries to separate the world of his friends,
yeah
of Naturel, and also the world of drug dealing. And that's Naturel's problematic thing here, too. And the stockbroker blames Naturel for the reason that he continues to sell drugs, the reason that he
yeah
stays in this, as if she is sort of this gold digger who is existing off
Mhm.
of the pain of others. And if
yeah
she wasn't there in the stockbroker's mind, then perhaps Edward Norton, Monty
yeah
wouldn't
he
have the same
accuses her
power.
of perpetuating it
Hmm.
which I don't know. I mean, as we've seen, he was drug dealing like before he meets
Yeah.
Natural. So I mean, you know, it's you know, I don't know. But again, I guess the idea is that everybody in his life knew what he was doing, but they didn't really go too much out of their way to get him to stop. You know, living a life of crime, and it sort of like caught up with him basically.
Everyone in their own way is at fault. Yes, Naturel is an enabler, but so too is Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, and so too is the
Yeah.
banker, and so too is everyone else's life. Because as you point out, they all knew what he was doing, they all knew what he did, and no one stopped him. No one cared until the moment he got caught, because no one ever cares until he got caught. It's not illegal, it's not a problem, it's fine. It's just whatever. But suddenly, when you get caught, here come the ethics, here come the morals. Suddenly, everyone has this thing to say about it, but no one says
Sure.
anything while it's actually going on. And we see with the Russian, which him being the informant, I did not expect because he's just this
Yeah, it's
big,
great.
gruffy, happy go lucky guy. One of my favorite characters,
He's like
arguably
he's Ukrainian
Ukrainian. Yes,
guy.
he's not Russian, he's
Yeah.
Ukrainian. He makes that
Yeah. Makes
that
a
point.
distinction. Yeah.
He makes the distinction, which I guess is a very important distinction to make now. But
Yeah.
he really is one of the only characters until he becomes the informant that isn't a terrible human being. I mean, I guess he is selling
Yeah, I
drugs
guess. Yeah. He probably
and
has
is
killed
part of
some
the
people.
mafia,
Yeah, he's
but
part of this like mafia.
maybe we just don't know. But whenever we see him, he
We
always
don't know much
seems so
about him.
very happy. We
He's
don't know
like a
very much about
gregarious.
him.
He's like a fun gregarious guy, right? Like they go to the club, right? And they, he's like, oh, you're my friend. I'll get you a lady. You want a lady? Like he's like a fun gregarious guy. Which all of that in retrospect is, funny
It's
and
an
interesting
act.
because it turns out he's a snitch. He's a informant.
Yeah.
He snitched
It-
on Monty. He
And we
ruined his
see
life
throughout the
basically.
film that he's trying to convince Monty that it's Naturel
Right.
that has given him up, which through most of the film, you are wondering. It is kind of odd. They knew exactly where the drugs were, they knew they
Right.
got the warrant. It all seems a little too simple. And as the banker points out, Naturel has been living this life. And if Monty gets
Yeah.
arrested, if she informs on him, nothing happens to her. She's no accomplice. She's not
Yeah.
punished for anything. And so you have to suspect. I mean, there's that moment where they're in the interrogation, and they're interrogating Monty, and the door is open, and we see Naturel walk by. And at that moment, you can't help but
Yeah.
think, did she just inform on him? I
Right,
mean,
and
it's
the cops and the detectives make him think that too,
yeah.
right? They're like, but they don't
Yes.
specifically. They're obviously like bluffing, right? Like
Yeah.
they're trying to like get him to you know be play ball, as they say.
Which all of the side characters, I mean, you talked about earlier, which
Yeah,
is
they're
so
funny.
strange about this film is Spike Lee is so interested in black lives and black characters, and having three white characters as our main actors is kind of weird, but all of our side characters, almost all of them,
Right, there are
are
black.
black.
There's black people in the movie. It's but
There
like
is,
there are
but they're
other and
not
Rosario. Yeah,
the
they're not the
central
main
idea.
characters.
But
Yeah,
like those cops, some of the best performances, some of the most entertaining
yeah, they're funny.
performances in
Is that
movies.
is that the guy from The Wire? The guy who plays the cop? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that because he does his famous line that he does in Wire all the time.
Shit. Yeah.
Shit.
Shit.
He does it every
Yeah.
season in The Wire, and it's great every single time. It's so enjoyable to hear him say that. It's no one can deliver that line as
Yeah,
well.
he's in a lot of oh, he's in Veep as well. He's
Yep,
in a lot of stuff.
he's in
Great
tons of
actor.
stuff. That guy's
Great,
awesome.
great, great,
I
great,
love that
great, great
guy.
actor. Patrice O'Neill is also you see Patrice O'Neill, like he rest in peace, he plays like the bouncer. I knew
Yeah.
recognized him right away. I'm like, oh, it's Patrice O'Neill. He plays like the bouncer at the club. He's awesome. I love him a lot too. Yeah, a lot of good, supporting roles and things like that. But again, Anna Paquin, she's really good too. She's funny. But again, like the central kind of thing is kind of like those 3, 4 characters, right, of Edward, of like, Monty, his two friends and his girlfriend, and kind of like how they're dealing with like him going to prison and stuff like that. And I like Philip Seymour Hoffman's like fits in the movie, his fit in the movie with like the Yankees cap. It's like
Yeah.
he gets off work and it's like time to relax and have fun with the boys. Put on my Yankees baseball cap. He doesn't change clothes. He just puts on the
It's on the
baseball cap
hat.
and he's like ready to go. While Barry Pepper clearly like he wears a suit and then he puts on, he's like going out clothes and it's like that's great. I like when they're sitting in the Chinese restaurant, they're talking. I like their conversations together, the conversations between like Frank, the Barry Pepper character, and
Mhm.
Jacob, the Philip Seymour Hoffman character. They interact really well together. And then yeah, Monty is kind of like a wrench thrown in, and he's good as well. Of course, Edward Norton's good in that role as well. So, but yeah, I think it's like those 3, 4 characters that really kind of sell the movie.
Yeah, one of the things that I like about this film is even though this is Monty's story, we get to spend a lot of time with each of them alone. I mean, the first time we meet each of them, we get to really shape who they are as people. We spend scenes just with Frank or just with Philip Seymour
Yeah,
Hoffman, the teacher,
like at their jobs and
at
stuff.
their jobs, seeing how they exist in the world. And there's this very interesting interaction with sort of their work life and then their non-work life. Like these are two separate things that almost never interact with each other, as if they live these two lives of this is who I am at work, this is what I do, and then this is how
Yeah,
I interact outside of it. But of course, they seep into each other, as we all do, because our work always seeps into our personal life, and our personal life always seeps into the work that we do, and it shapes these people and how they interact in the world. I mean, no matter who you are, if you work on Wall Street, you are going to interact with the world in a certain way. You are going to see this world a certain way. If you're a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
teacher, you're going to see the world, especially an English teacher. Speaking as an English teacher myself, you are going to see the world in a specific way. And those two things shape each other and mold each other. And so you can
Right.
never really separate the two, even though the film separates all of the scenes at work and then there's all of the scenes after work as if it's this one thing and then it's the other thing, but they're
Mhm.
constantly seeping within each other, and seeing those conversations between the
Yeah,
banker and the teacher are really interesting because their dynamic is strange because
yeah, yeah,
it's like
yeah.
Edward Norton's the thing that holds the three of them together. I mean, they're
Right.
friends with each other, but it's very clear that
Right.
they're more both friends with Monty, and then they're sort
Mhm.
of friends by proxy. So they're still friends together, but there's this awkwardness to it.
Yeah,
And
which
yet
is great.
they can
It's
still
funny.
like bounce back and forth. And
Uh-huh.
I think it's partly because the banker and the teacher are almost on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? The banker's like, he's up here, he's everywhere, he's very excited, he's very loud.
Yeah.
And then you have Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, who's very quiet. He is very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
He's not big, he's not gregarious. And Monty's kind of that middle person. He's someone who
Yeah.
walks the line between these two
Mhm.
worlds. And so he kind of puts them together. And so when Monty's not there to bridge that gap, they're constantly
Yeah.
at odds with each other because they just see the world differently. They don't understand.
Yeah, but then again, like we were talking about earlier with like his like with Monty's drug dealing, like they're all three of them are at odds with each other, right? In different
Yeah.
ways, right? Things aren't the same as when they were in like kids in school, right? Because that's like kind of like where that's why they're friends, right? They've been friends for a really, really long time since like elementary school or whatever, and they probably have a lot of things in common. But as you become an adult and you get older and you get different jobs, and everybody gets different jobs and they have like different lifestyles and stuff like that, all three of them sort of maybe kind of like drift, but they're still like great friends. Like they'll always be friends. They can like that's why, he's choosing to spend. Well, that's why Monty's choosing to spend his last day of freedom to like hang out with those friends because there are, more or less like his best friends, like the ones that he probably loves the most. So yeah, that those dynamics are in there too. And again, I like that dynamic a lot between like those three friends. Like I think it's rich, it's funny, it's interesting, that and thankfully all three of them are great actors that like really kind of like flesh it out. And of course you have the wrench of course thrown in with Natural, which who they all kind of like, right? And then
Uh,
Barry Pepper goes like on a tirade against her too, which is very interesting later
yeah.
on in the movie. Like they all kind of there is like her being kind of like in the configuration complicates it too, like the whole section where they go out and they're drinking and they're going to the club and stuff. All that stuff I found to be like very captivating. I thought that stuff was so good, just as sort of like this kind of like dramatic character uh uh scenes. Yeah.
What I find so fascinating about their friendship, and it is very specific to friendships that are built from childhood, and I think this is true with those who marry their childhood sweethearts, as I was lucky enough to do. The person we meet, the person we become friends with, is a child themselves, as you are when you meet them. And you exist in the world in this specific way, and you see the world in this specific way. But as you grow older, you become different people. And you wonder if these three people or if me and my friends who have known forever, like me and you, if we had met today, would we still have, would we be friends? Would we know each other?
No,
Or,
I mean like just because like the element of time is like very is obviously
yeah,
like very important. Like it's just, it can't be replicated in any other way. Obviously like people, friends, people in relate like, you know, they have like, these sort of like chemical like, moments where all of a sudden, there's like chemistry and it feels like, oh, I've known you. It feels like I've only known you for a short period of time, but it feels like I've known you forever. You have like those kinds of moments and they happen, but even then those relationships they change over time as well. That's just how it is.
they're constantly shifting. And Frank makes this great point when he's talking to Philip Seymour Hoffman at that moment when they're in front of the window in front of Ground Zero. He makes the point that when Monty goes to jail, we're not going to go visit him.
Yeah.
We're not going to call him. We're not going to see him. And frankly, when the 7 years is up, we're not suddenly going to be friends again. This is, to
Yeah.
Frank, this is the end of a friendship
Right.
because, and perhaps maybe this is the more realistic idea, and maybe Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is too optimistic in this because Philip Seymour Hoffman's
Yeah.
like, no, I'm going to go up there every month.
No,
I'm
I'm
going
gonna
to
visit him. Like,
talk to him. I'm going to visit him. And then when he gets
it's just
out,
not
it'll
the same.
just be
It
like
just, yeah. His
everything will
point, the
be,
Barry Pepper, yeah, Barry Pepper's point is that like it just won't be the same.
yeah. And in a certain sense, perhaps he is more
Yeah.
accurate. Perhaps he's right because 7 years apart, 7 years in prison will change a person. And also, they harp a lot on this. And maybe it was a bigger problem than it is now, or
You're talking
maybe,
about like being like
yeah,
assaulted in prison. Yeah. I mean,
he
like
seems very concerned.
if you I mean, if I honestly, Austin, if I was going to a prison, I would be worried about it too. Like you wouldn't be worried about that. That wouldn't be like a thought that would cross your mind if you were about to go to prison for years.
Yeah. I mean,
I
I
mean,
guess,
like I don't think it's like I understand there's kind of like this like I understand that it's probably exaggerated,
yeah.
right? The movie is very exaggerated. I'm thinking of like all the scenes where this movie's interesting because like it's kind of has like this exaggerated element, but it's not like I like Spike Lee movies because they're not surreal, but they're exaggerated. He
For
definitely
sure.
uses certain filming techniques to like exaggerate certain moments and emotions.
Hmm.
So like kind of like so, he uses that filmmaking technique, like in Malcolm X. He uses that same like a thing, like when he's going to his final speech. He uses that here, like after like Philip Seymour Hoffman kisses Anna Paquin or whatever, where they it looks like they're floating
Yeah,
forward. It
the
looks like they're moving, but they're just like standing, like
standing
they're
in
not
place, the
moving, they're
famous
standing, but
Spike
it
Lee
looks like they're
move.
floating or
Hmm.
whatever. I love those moments because it's not obviously it's not it's like it just kind of like a little tiny surreal moment, right? To kind of accentuate like how he feels, like and when like when Philip Seymour Hoffman is like looking like basically straight at the camera and he's floating. What a great moment. Yeah. And everything too just seems like everything is like very blown out. Just to kind of
Hmm.
like talk about how the movie looks, everything is kind of blown out. It's like the whites are very white and the darks are very dark, which is I feel like in contrast to like a movie like Do the Right Thing,
Yeah.
which is like a very like colorful movie. Like I always think when I think of that movie, I think of how like colorful in '90s is it is, and then like 25th Hour is like not colorful. It's like dour. It's like it's blown out. It's kind of ugly. Like I think that adds to how the movie feels.
And we also get this feeling that even when they go to the club, this place that's supposed to be fun and
Yeah,
excitement, the blues are so, everything is
yeah.
so blue that it's this monochrome. And
They're like at a wake, basically. Like it's not a party. It's like a wake for the
yeah.
death of they're anticipating basically the death of their friend and their lover.
And there's this haunting element to it, this juxtaposition of watching
Yeah.
all these people yelling and screaming and having fun and not feeling that, and this monotony or terror of what's to come, and unable to
Yeah.
exist in the moment, unable to be there. I mean, Monty's whole mindset the whole time is like, this fucking sucks. I hate it. I don't know
Yeah.
what to do.
I would feel the same way too. I find it so relatable. Like I find the movie so relatable just because like I just think that like if this were me, if I was going to prison and this was my last 24 hours, I completely like recognize that like me or anyone would like feel this way. Just like completely like that going through like the stages of grief kind of thing, you know?
I think it's almost worse being out on bail because you have those moments of freedom where if you just went straight to prison, you just went from jail to prison or jail to prison, then you'll
Yeah,
have the illusion of freedom, but at this
right. Yeah.
you yourself have to go through the process of giving yourself up, even though you already know you're going to prison.
It would just
And
make me so sick.
Edward Norton, I think he really captures just those raw emotions of not knowing what to do. I mean, he talks about killing himself because
Yeah.
what else am I supposed to do? And Frank even makes point. He's like, you got three options.
Yeah.
You can take the train out of town, you can take the bullet train, or you can go to prison. There's no
Yeah.
good options. Everything is decided for you from the very beginning. There is no sense of choice. And
Yeah, it's over.
that's how all of these characters feel in
Yeah.
this, as if they're being moved in these directions. I mean, you talk about that moment with Philip Seymour Hoffman when they do the famous Spike Lee camera move where
Yeah.
he's standing on the
He
dolly and the
rocks.
dolly's moving and he's
Yeah.
floating across as he does in all of his work. And it's as if no one's doing things by choice, right? They're being moved by someone else. They're being moved by something else. All the things that every one of them does, it's not their fault. They can't be to blame for this. And I think that's part of it too, is they're looking for someone to blame. They're saying, well, it's fate, it's destiny. So it doesn't matter if I make a terrible choice. It doesn't matter if I do a terrible thing because I never had an option in the first place. And these are all people who don't feel like they have any options, which is why Frank is so interesting because he's the only one that has any sort of free will almost. He's the only one that ever makes decisions that feel like they're his decisions, that he can actually make a decision. I mean, the very
He's
first time
such an asshole.
he's a terrible asshole, but the very first time we see him, he's
Yeah.
up on Wall Street, he's making his moves,
Yeah.
and he is the only one that goes against what he's told to do. He is told that
Yeah.
he needs to sell his options because the numbers are going to come in and it's not going to work. And of
And he's
course,
right. Yeah.
he's completely right. He
Yeah.
goes against the grain, but he's the only one that ever does that. I mean, all of the other characters, even Monty, who's a drug dealer, still does what he's told. I mean,
Well, yeah. I
who
mean, I
else?
would say Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, like he does just that when he kisses Anna Paquin.
Hmm.
He goes against the grain. Shouldn't, it's not,
But even when he goes to do that, it's as if he's justified to himself that he has no choice. He can't control himself. This is something
Yeah.
outside himself. There is nothing that he can do, and that's what all of the characters feel is, well, there's nothing I can do about it. A sense of apathy. Even Naturel has the sense of apathy. Just this is the way it's going to be, and that's just how it is. And there's nothing that we can do about it. There's
Yeah.
nothing that we can do to change this. We just have to exist in this world.
Yeah, and again, that just all those things just kind of like add to, again to kind of just like the terrible kind of apathetic vibe of the film, just because like I just like it just has that like, it's all over, everything's over, my life is over, it's all done for, like, kind of feeling, right? Like it's all just kind of burned down, like, every all the characters like feel this way, everybody feels terrible, like, and again, I think that really I like that part of the movie a lot just because again, it would feel this way if you were going to prison. You would go through the fucking stages of grief if you had to go. And again, I just like to kind of like go back. I just really love that scene where he looks in the mirror and stuff and he just goes in the hate tirade. Like I just love that because like obviously like Spike Lee loves like New York City and stuff like that and he never like he doesn't like agree with the monologue and Edward Norton himself doesn't agree with the monologue either. But yeah, like it's almost like he's thinking all these things in a second and then he dismisses it, right? It's almost like he's not literally talking to himself in the mirror, but he's like for a second he's like, "Fuck, I hate everything. I hate he's going like he's being racist, he's being sexist, he's like saying how much he hates his girlfriend and his friends and his parents and stuff like and all that and I just that is definitely like one of the great film moments of this period because it's just so potent. And I love how Spike Lee he directs that scene too. It's just so good.
Yeah, and it shows that this hatred isn't something conscious, which is the terror of it. It's not something that
Yeah.
we are actively thinking and doing. It's something that just hits you, that just happens because your brain has been trained by a million different things, a million different decisions that you make, conscious decisions that have created this
Yeah.
unconscious state of hatred. And it takes a conscious act. I think this is one of Spike Lee's big themes throughout all of his work, is that hatred is an unconscious act. It is something that is perpetuated by everything, all of the conscious things that we've done have built an unconscious act of hatred. And to stop that hatred, to end that hatred, the only thing, it has to be a conscious act. You can't just unconsciously not be this way anymore. Just unconsciously stop being racist or sexist or nationalist or whatever your thing is, whatever your ism is. It's a conscious effort that you have to do, that Edward Norton himself has to do. He has to consciously say, no, this is wrong. I don't hate all these people. It's actually
I hate myself for like what
myself.
I've done. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's coming, his hatred is coming from his hatred of other things and other people comes from his like his sense of just like his self-respect, his he's so down in the dumps, right? Like he's transferring his hatred of himself into like basically just like everything around him, there's no rhyme or reason to like his racism or whatever in that instance. He's just kind of like, just sort of being generally hateful of everything that he sees and that's around him. And then, of course, he brings that back to the big end of the movie when he's like going back to when he's going to prison, not back to prison, but he's going to prison, and we see the images that we see from his monologue,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, if you were going to prison, if you were going to prison for a long, long time, for 7 years, I mean, that's no short amount of time. If you were going to prison, really for any amount of time, yeah, you would probably feel so crappy. You would probably even think about missing the things that you hate.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like people always hate like sitting in traffic or whatever. Sitting in traffic for hours probably doesn't compare to being in prison for years, like you would miss that, like you would miss stuff like that.
Yeah, I love the idea that the terror is so great that you don't only miss the things that you love, or almost that you miss the things that you've overlooked or hated even more so because those created visceral feelings. And this is a film about
Yeah.
apathy, about the loss of feelings, which is really what the whole prison sentence is about. I mean, throw away all that other stuff. It's about the sense of apathy, of not feeling, of
Yeah.
not existing in the world. And so what's so great about the things that frustrate you, the things that hate, is that those are visceral feelings. Those are really big feelings, even if they're not good feelings, even if they're not
Yeah.
feelings you want to have when your life is good. But when the other option is apathy, when the other option is having no feelings, suddenly those things feel great. They feel incredible because at least they are something. At least they're evoking some emotion. And
Uh-huh.
this film is slowly moving to a point where everything's just getting more and more apathetic. There's less and less they can do. There's less and less control. There's control at the beginning of the movie. Everyone has the sense that they can do things, but the more we get through the film, the less control that they have until we get to the end where it feels completely out of his control. There's nothing. I mean, he can't even go to prison himself. His dad is
Yeah.
driving him there. He doesn't even have the capacity for him himself to do it. He can't even do this one last thing. He can't even get on the bus and do it himself. His dad is driving there for him.
Yeah. I think that's just because like you couldn't really drive your car there because then your car would just be stuck there for 7 years. I don't think that's how it works. But yeah, yeah. And yeah, and you have that scene too where he like wants to get beat up, right? Because he's
It's a
asking
favor.
like he's asking to go through this like, yeah, the favor. He's asking to go through like this horrible like situation in which like getting beat up by like your best friend is still better than like feeling a little bit better about the fact that you're not going to get assaulted in prison, I guess. It's like it's just kind of like, yeah, I want you to beat me up. I'd rather you do it so that maybe I won't get assaulted in prison. That's rough.
It's a brutal scene, but Frank does it. I mean, he doesn't do it by
I
choice
don't think he does it
necessarily.
that well.
He does not do it at will, but he is expressing all of the anger and frustration. And you can see that anger
Yeah. Yeah, it comes out.
comes not from a place of morals or ethics. Really, he's mad at him because he feels like he's losing his best friend, and he feels as if he has been cheated out of his best friend. His best
Right.
friend has been stolen from him, and it's Monty's fault that Monty is leaving, and that all comes out in that moment. And he is blaming Monty for his own pain and suffering of seeing his best friend being gone for 7 years and knowing that once those 7 years is up, he probably won't ever see him again. Or if he does, things won't be the same. They won't be the same friends they
Yeah.
are now. And so that moment is the epitome of all his anger and frustration that he's constantly hiding from Monty. He pretends that, oh, everything is fine. We're going to have a good time. And they constantly talk about, oh, well, this is Monty's night. Let's put on our
Yeah.
best faces. Let's pretend to be happy when all of us are all miserable because we know what's about to happen.
Yeah.
Of
And he gets
course we're
drunk, and
miserable.
then he like goes back on that anyway. He like gets drunk, and then he like, rips into like Natural for no reason. He goes
Hmm.
on he's again, that character is really, really great. Yeah. And again, kind of like talking about his drive, I mean that final scene is, amazing. Like it's one of the best endings. Like, like what better way to end a movie like that, right? Like it's hard to put into words like how good it is. Just like the first of all, Brian Cox is a great actor. He's one of the finest actors.
Hmm.
Whenever I see him in a movie, I always get excited because he has a great voice. He's kind of has an unusual look. I don't know if you haven't watched Succession. He's very good in Succession. He's very, very funny in that show. So I'm glad that people kind of are like
They're on the Brian
appreciate
Cox
him.
train.
They appreciate him a lot. I feel like, yeah, since that show they appreciate him a lot more than maybe they did,
Yeah.
because he's so good in the movie. And yeah, his monologue at the end is just it's just perfect.
It is a long and powerful monologue
It
where
keeps going.
it goes way longer than I expected to. I expected to be a couple of lines. You're gonna go
Goes
to
through the
this new
whole thing.
city, but he talks through his entire life, and we see Edward Norton walk across the desert and go to all these different
Yeah,
places. He comes to
he's like, we
this.
should just like not even go to prison. Let's get off the bridge right here and let's just drive west. Like let's just we can do it right now.
Mhm.
And then
And
like it'll end in a perfect ending where you get reunited with Natural and you have a bunch of kids.
and we see Edward Norton live his whole life. He gets the job at the bar.
Yeah.
He befriends people. He gets a new driver's license. There's that great moment where the bus comes and you think that, oh, he can't do it anymore. He's going to go back to New York because
Yeah.
Brian Cox makes the great point. The reason people get caught isn't because
Is
someone
because they
finds
go
them.
back
It's
home.
because they go back
Yeah.
home. They always go back home. So never go back home. And so when we see that bus come, we think at that moment, oh no, he's going to go back home. He's going to confess to what he's done because he misses Naturel. He misses his friends, his
Yeah.
family. He misses his dad because his dad makes it very clear, you
Yeah.
can never talk to me again. At this moment, we are dead to each other.
Right.
We do no longer exist, which is a terrifying thing to do as a son or a father to basically say, you no longer exist in my world. So when that bus comes, we think, oh, he's given up. He needs
Yeah.
to see his family. He can't do it anymore. But then the bus leaves and Edward Norton's still there. And who else is there but
Yeah, ends on Natural.
Naturel?
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a little silly.
It's a great moment. I love it.
Right. Like that's when you know like, oh, it's like it's a dream. It's like it's a fantasy.
Hmm.
It's not it's completely within the mind of like Edward Norton. He's imagining it. He's imagining like he's just kind of like imagining what Brian Cox is saying, right? About like, let's get off here. Let's, go out, escape, from the end of your life, start a new one, and just, I think how does he end his monologue? Like, you'll tell them the whole story,
Yeah.
you tell them how lucky it is, like this life, almost didn't happen. And, the funny thing is about the movie is that like it didn't at all. In the fantasy, it almost didn't happen. But yeah, like in the real life, in the reality of the movie, it really didn't, and as it's basically just like it's just like one of the saddest kind of like, it's like a person imagining their whole lives before they die, remembering their whole lives, like,
Mm.
flash before their eyes before they pass away, right? And that's basically what happens at this movie. Edward Norton's character Monty, like he essentially dies at the end. Like he essentially like loses everything. He doesn't literally die, because he's just going to prison, but essentially that's what happens, right? And he talks about too, like, if I get out of when I do get out of prison, what can I do? I don't have any, I don't have any like skills or anything like that.
No one wants
All
to
I've
hire a
known,
felon in the first place.
no one wants to hire a felon, and all I've known to do is drug dealing. And so, what am I going to get a job doing? Anyway, either way, it's like either way, it's over.
Yeah,
It's just that's just kind of like the idea. That's just the how that's just the ultimate feeling that the movie just sort of shouts is like it's over, it's done.
yeah. I think that's the most interesting thing it has to say about prison, and it has a lot to say about prison. And some of the stuff I think it's a little exaggerated, but it's a thing that I think is the most interesting and the most powerful and the most haunting, which is the moment you're arrested, you're kind of fucked forever
Yeah,
because as
you're
Monty
done.
points out, no one wants to hire you in the first place. Most people who are arrested, they turn to this life because of a million different reasons that were sort of outside of their control. Although what's interesting about Monty is it was completely in his control. It was his choice to turn to this life of crime. But they often don't have the skills to work in specific fields. They're not doctors, typically, not always, but typically they're not doctors, they're not stockbrokers, they're not teachers. So they don't have those skills and they've wasted years of their life. And their only options when they come out is a really shitty job, which will be really hard to find because they're a felon and they'll never
Yeah.
make any money, or go back to a life of crime. And if they go back to a life of crime, because that's their only option, because we've created this perpetual cycle of people who go to prison, we treat them this certain way, even when they leave
Right.
prison, that then
Yeah.
they are punished
Yeah.
even further for that. And
Yeah.
that's,
It's
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like I don't know if Spike Lee is necessarily commenting too much on the status, on the state of like kind of like the prison system in the United States. He
Hmm.
just sort of recognizes that it's like terrible and fucked
Yeah.
and just like inescapable.
Hmm.
Like you said, when you get arrested, you're kind of screwed forever, more or less. There are things that there are places that do good work to try to like get your record expunged and stuff like that. But this is post nine
This
eleven.
is
You know what
2002.
I mean? Which is kind of interesting because I read that this movie was already in development when 9/11 happened. So not adding the 9/11
Really?
elements. Yeah, it's like based off a novel that was written before 9/11. I
Okay.
mean, and so like they were like making the movie and so that 9/11 elements were just kind of added in,
Huh.
basically maybe not as an afterthought, but because obviously it feels like the
Yeah.
connection between the two, the novel, the story of the novel and like 9/11 is obviously like intertwined in a way that's very very successful.
Mhm.
And but that's it's kind of interesting that like it is a bit of an afterthought, but yeah, it's like post 9/11. But I think like yeah, him getting screwed over as bad as he did just for drug dealing, I just think it's
It's a
realistic
response.
considering it's post 9/11, which there's like a crackdown probably at that point, it's a crackdown on everything, all violence, all terrorism, all drug dealing.
Which the police officer even makes that point because Edward Norton's like, "Oh, I'll just
Right.
plead and say all these different things." And the
Right.
police
Eh,
officers, no, new laws have been put in place, which they were right after
Yeah,
9/11,
like the
that
Patriot Act and stuff like that
Patriot Act and things of that nature
to
that
punish basically just Americans more
just
for no reason.
just to punish Americans for existing in the world. And so he's part of that generation almost of people who were imprisoned in this era of 2000 to 2008, 2009, who just got severely worse punishments than before or after because of the
For
state
no
of the
reason.
nation and the
Yeah.
people running the country and just a lot of problematic things that had nothing to
George
do.
W. Bush, our
George W.
president.
Bush, Dick Cheney, a lot of people
Yeah.
involved
All
that
those guys.
pretty evil.
Yeah, I would say so.
But yeah, that's the movie. Should we drop
Yeah,
some
that's it.
final
Yeah.
thoughts here?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, we should.
All right, I'll go first this time. I am a huge Spike Lee fan. I love a lot of the things he's done. Do the Right Thing is one of the greatest movies ever made. Malcolm X, arguably top five films of all time. It's hard to beat a film like Malcolm X. And I knew this wasn't going to be as good as Malcolm X, and it is not the same tier. It is not top tier Spike Lee, which even great directors, they have tiers. They have their great work and their lesser work. And for me, I would put this film in probably the lesser Spike Lee work. I think part of the problem is that it isn't written by Spike Lee, and so some of those things I look for in a Spike Lee film are missing. And perhaps that's more of me expecting a Spike Lee joint to exist in a certain way than it is a fault of the film itself. I'm just looking for these specific things that I didn't get to see in this film. One of the things that we didn't really talk about, but I think has always been a problem with Spike Lee's work, is his portrayal of women has never
Yeah.
been
Which is why, like, I don't
great.
understand, like, why you're. Which is why I was gonna say, like, you're lamenting the loss of his writing, but his writing has some problems. I always thought
It
that, like, it's
does.
not his writing isn't. I don't think he's like a pitch perfect writer. He's great
No.
when he's great, but yeah, sorry, not to.
No, no, I completely get this. So maybe it's a little bit cognitive dissonance. On the one end, I lament the fact that he doesn't portray female characters well, but on the other
Well,
end,
just like
I
it's
miss
just the
his
one female
voice.
character in this movie, and
But there's
yeah,
only two female characters in this,
basically that's true. Yeah,
and I still don't think they're portrayed very well in this film. I think they're merely
yeah,
there
I
to
guess.
move the story forward. They have no actions of their own. They don't do anything other than to push the story forward, which I think is a little problematic. They're used as props and everyone sort of talks around them. I don't feel like they have a whole lot to do in it. It's and then of course the fact that Naturel Edward Norton meets her when she's 18, which is she's still in high school. It's not great.
What? Yeah, I mean, like, again, Spike Lee isn't. I don't think he's like advocating for you to act
No,
the way
no,
that these characters act.
no. I
I don't
I
know.
don't.
I like I like Rosario Dawson. I think she's very good in the movie. I don't know. I feel differently about it, but go on. Sorry.
No, I think she gives a great performance. I don't see her doing a lot in the film other than just being Monty's
She is beautiful.
girlfriend.
Yeah, she's beautiful.
she,
You know.
she is.
Yeah.
That's very true. But that is my only big complaint with the film. And other than the fact, I think they harp a little bit too much on. I mean, I don't know. I've never been to prison, so maybe the rape problem. I know it exists and it's not good, but I don't know if it's. I don't know.
It's 2000 like 2 or
It's
something.
2002 in overpopulated prison, so maybe I just couldn't put myself in that mindset. Maybe it just felt a little exaggerated, which all of Spike Lee's work has this sort of weird exaggeration to it, which I like. And
Yeah.
seeing Philip Seymour Hoffman, anything is great. Although everyone in this just
Yeah,
really gives
all of
it
you.
their all. So I'm torn. I am. I was coming in this piece with like a 6 out of 10, but I think I'm gonna go with an 8. I think I feel good with that. I'm gonna go with the 8 out of 10.
I mean, I think it's a great movie, and for me it's like between like an 8 or a 9. I think I'll stick with the 8. I just think that like I think I kind of disagree with what you're saying because I think that like Natural character is actually quite strong and interesting. Um, at least relatively. Um, and she's a great actor and all that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Austin. Again, if you're going to prison, that would be a worry. That would be like a thing I would be concerned with, at least, in some kind of way. I like to think that maybe things have changed in the past like 20 years, but I think maybe some things haven't either.
Hmm.
And so no, I don't know. I just disagree with you on that element because I think it's again, I think the movie is reflecting a worry, a real worry that the character has. And
Yeah.
again, I just like that the movie kind of does that in general. It reflects this kind of like foreboding, kind of just it's over attitude. It's sort of reflected in the mood of the movie, the way it looks, the way the characters talk and act. That combined with kind of like it being like post 9/11, New York City, these things like they really kind of add this sort of just just like increasingly difficult and increasingly like sad, depressing like demeanor to the film that is just so it's so potent and so good. And I think it's a good story. I think it's a good central conceit to have in a movie, right? A guy is one final day before he goes to prison. That's great. You could remix that in any kind of way. And I like the New York City locations and everything. These things are really, really like fun to watch. So yeah, I just I again I would give it like an 8. maybe a 9, but I think I'm gonna stick with the 8. For me, I think of the Spike Lee movies that I have seen. The mailman's like finicking with my shit. He's a nice guy, but he does too much.
What do you mean he does too much?
He like puts like my book packages like in between like the screen door and my
Oh
regular
yeah.
door, just so it can be like protected so that people
Uh-huh.
don't steal it. But they're just books. You can just put them on the porch. I really don't care. Anyway, yeah, 8 out of 10 for me. Love it. I think it's a top. It's a top one for me. Maybe not as good as Malcolm X. It's hard to say. Maybe not as good as Do the Right Thing, but I think it's in within that that kind of
Wow.
meal that kind
I
of
don't know
like
about
that.
that. I
I
don't
don't
know.
again. Well, it's definitely not better than maybe Do the Right Thing or like there's some other Spike Lee movies that I said that I've seen that are more kind of like like less like famous, less well known, and I
Mhm.
would say like 25th Hour is at least better than those movies, if not quite a bit better. Like
Yeah.
his like first movie, like She's Gotta Have It, and
Yeah.
his School Days movie, like those are good movies, but like 25th Hour to me is just like it's so good. So yeah.
All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. You can find everything I do at Austin Lugo.
You can find me on Letterboxd at Retro Andrew, RTR0 Andrew.
And you can find this podcast wherever you hear podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Have nothing to say. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks.